Hi, I'm Paul Reymann, CEO of the Reymann Group, and we're here today to talk about a significant risk. We actually call it a sleeper risk in most organizations and government agencies. Most of you today, you want your boards, your external auditors, your examiners to know that you have a no surprises rule when it comes to your information security program. And I'm here to tell you that that's not the case. In fact, we've recently discovered that there's this sleeper risk that exists, which puts a significant exposure to most corporations' information security programs. And here with me today is Michael Hall, CISO from DriveSavers Data Recovery Incorporated, who actually helped discover this risk a couple years ago. Michael, welcome and thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Paul. Glad to be here.
So Michael, if you would, tell me a little bit about how you discovered this sleeper risk and what your concerns were.
Well, I'm a CISO of DriveSavers now, but at one point in time, I was an active engineer and the director of engineering. And we literally see thousands of different types of media come to DriveSavers for data recovery, whether they have physical failure or logical corruption. During the process of the data recovery, we discovered that almost every single form of media has some sort of confidential information on it that the customer would absolutely not want to get into someone else's hands.
So let me pause you there for just a second and make sure I can interpret that into layman's terms. If I'm a bank officer, I have data on my laptop, maybe it's loan records of my clients, maybe it's credit card data of some customers. If I'm a doctor, I might have sensitive patient data on my laptop, right? All part of my day-to-day activities. And while I may be backing that up on the corporate networks, there's still a chance that at some point my hard drive is going to crash and the data that's on there is not going to be backed up and I need to recover it. Is that what we're talking about?
That's exactly what we're talking about. One of the big problems that occurs is that you have backed your information up, but you've been on the road for a couple of weeks and you've created new information, or you've acquired new information from someone else, and that information isn't backed up and it solely resides on that laptop. And when that laptop fails, you need that information back. That information is very important to you, to your customers, to everyone involved. So even if you have your information on a laptop backed up at the corporate facility, it doesn't mean that you haven't created new information on that laptop or on a thumb drive or any form of removable media. And we see a lot more of that type of media now than we did in the past.
So Michael, why do you think this gap in most information security programs still exists today?
I think it's a lack of awareness. I can give you an example. I attended a CSO roundtable summit. There were probably 15 to 20 different CSOs across the industry, from financial, healthcare, etc. My question to them was, what do you do about outsourcing data recovery? And they said, we don't know. Well, the problem with data recovery is that it's at the help desk level. And oftentimes at the help desk level, the criteria based on data recovery is speed and cost. They're not concerned or are not aware of the potential security risk with outsourcing to a third-party data recovery vendor.
So if I understand what you just shared with us, they're performing strong IT risk assessments. They have strong information security programs in place. They got a perimeter secure. They got their people trained. They got their facilities secured. They're prioritizing based on what they think are the high risk items and the high cost exposures. But in the end, such a simple thing that's delegated to the helpline is falling under the radar because it's a low budget operation. And I'm guessing they probably think it's already covered through their existing enterprise-wide vendor management program.
They do. They may vet their vendors under a business continuity plan, under a disaster recovery plan, under an incident response plan, but none of those are going to get invoked when you have a failed device that they need data recovery on. And oftentimes they rely on the help desk to resolve that issue for them rather than giving them guidance and regulations and procedures and protocols to adhere to when they do have to outsource their information to a third-party vendor.
So now I'm starting to see why clearly this is what I call the sleeper risk. It's such a simple thing to fix in terms of enhancing your vendor management program, but with this gap, in most information security programs, there's a huge downside in terms of the potential of data loss and a data breach and the cost and fines associated with that for a company. So tell me, what did DriveSavers do to help validate this and really build a business case around it?
We reached out to Larry Poneman of the Poneman Institute, and he conducted a survey with 636 different IT security and help desk support individuals and asked them the questions. How do you deal with third-party data recovery vendors? What is your criteria? What are your guidelines? What do you do in the process of selecting data recovery vendors? And the results that we got were shocking.
You know, and I actually took the liberty of downloading that study in preparation of talking to you, and I agree, it was pretty shocking. I categorized the results into basically three groups. One was the problems with the selection process or the vetting process of data recovery vendors, and as you've already noted, it's flying under the radar of any vendor management vetting program. Data recovery vendors are not being addressed. The other was in the use of third-party data recovery vendors. How frequently are they actually being used? And in fact, as you pointed out at the beginning of our conversation, it's on the increase, and a large percentage of them, about 80%, are using third-party data recovery vendors, which then brings us to the third category, which really made me nervous, and it's about the data loss risk and the exposure it creates for the organization or the government agency. What it showed was about 83% of the respondents in the survey had had one or more data breaches within the last 2 years, and a good percentage, 20%, said the breach was due to the data recovery vendor and the lack of the security controls at that data recovery vendor. In fact, about half said the breaches were because those data recovery vendors did not have security controls or adequate security controls. Clearly, that's a pretty significant finding, right? It's validating what you're talking about.
It absolutely validated what we suspected was going on for many years.
So I think what's important, though, is really finding a scenario where a large organization has experienced a significant exposure. I've identified what we call the smoking gun case. There was actually a multinational financial services company. They had a senior account exec of their wealth management team who had a lot of client data on his laptop, and it crashed. And what did he do? Like everybody would do, he dialed up the help desk, said, hey, I need my hard drive recovered and I need it right away, as soon as possible. Help desk said, no problem. They dialed up the local data recovery vendor that they had selected, sent the device out, they got it back, new hard drive, data reinstalled, everybody was happy, high fives all around. Nobody thought anything else of it. About 2 weeks later, wealth client, they have identity theft issues starting to occur. So the financial institution executes their forensics program to try and identify what the cause of the problem was. And you guessed it, it was because of the use of that data recovery vendor. They had actually hired individuals who had a criminal background that had identity theft practices in it. And they had actually stolen the data off of the hard drive before they sent it back to the financial institution. So the downside to them was huge. There was the cost of notifying all those clients. There was other costs and penalties associated with that. The reputation was at risk. The trust factor was jeopardized. So clearly, that smoking gun does exist, and I'm sure they're not the only case we could come up with if we just looked a little bit harder. So we've talked about the sleeper risk. We've verified through the Poneman Institute study that clearly it does exist. There's a large need for raising awareness out there. And we've confirmed there's a smoking gun case that proves it's a real risk and it's creating exposure for large companies, large financial institutions, and many others. So clearly, as you and I talked about, it was necessary to take the next steps and really raise awareness in a big way. So if you recall, about a year ago today, we were able to meet with several key regulatory agencies, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, the banking regulators, and the Financial Services Roundtable met with us, the folks from BITS. And what was pretty exciting, as you probably recall, is within the first 5 to 10 minutes of each of those meetings, their eyes opened wide and they said, we got it. This isn't a potential risk, this is a huge risk. And it's not just that people stealing the data off the devices while it's being recovered, it's what's coming back on those new hard drives in terms of viruses and spyware programs that could be jeopardizing the security of the network. Who's looking at these devices? Are they being scanned? So it was pretty exciting. They got it right away, and in fact, as we've seen, within about 90 days, NIST published updated guidance, and they added a specific paragraph just about this. I know they're going to update additional guidance going forward to make sure they're covering this in the vendor management related guidance. The banking agencies are drafting guidance as well as they continue to update their guidelines. This is going to be on their radar. And we found that BITS actually updated their vendor risk assessment tool, the SIG tool version 6 recently, to also include vetting of third-party data recovery vendors as a specific example of additional vendor management risks. So clearly, we've started to raise the awareness, don't you think?
Absolutely. I was pleasantly surprised at how quick the government entities reacted to the message that we were delivering. It completely validated what we knew all along, that there was a huge risk associated with outsourcing information to third-party data recovery vendors.
And it's such a simple fix. Just enhance some of the existing guidance with additional clarification of, hey, vendor management includes third-party data recovery vendors, and here's some of the risks that you're exposed to. What are some of the protocols, the best practices, if you will, that made it into the guidance that I know you were very influential in drafting?
Well, part of what came out of the Ponemon survey, one of the questions was, what would you like to see as far as guidelines for third-party data recovery vendors? And it was much of what we already have in place at DriveSavers.
So give me a couple examples. What are some of the steps organizations should be taking?
Well, I can tell you one that's really important is background checks on their employees. You want to have a security compliance platform that has been vetted. Ours is a SAS 70 Type 2. We offer up the ability for any company to come and vet us in their risk management process. We also offer custom security solutions, which was one of the suggestions in the survey. Custom security solutions can include lockboxes during transit. It can also include chain of custody. Non-disclosures can be in place. Master service agreements can be in place. They also suggested that you have a Class 5 clean room, which we do at our facility. Oftentimes the best chance of a data recovery is the very first chance. And so you want to do it in the most pristine environment that you can. Another one was that the engineers be certified in all the various encryption platforms so that they can meet the needs of the various organizations and the various encryption platforms that they deploy. Those are some of the suggestions that they had, and fortunately we had already been proactive enough at DriveSavers to have those in place.
Terrific. Well, kudos for that. And really, what we're talking about isn't rocket science. I mean, it's just existing recognized best practices that you would implement within your own organization before you hire your own people or you did the work internally. So we're just talking about carrying that out to this vendor community that's doing data recovery practices, which clearly, as you've talked about, is a growing market. So it's creating growing exposures that until now had gone unnoticed, right?
Correct. Most every corporation has these types of security protocols in place right now, but they're dealing on the inside of their perimeter, not on the outside. It's when information leaves the inside of the security perimeter and goes to the outside to a third-party data recovery vendor where that vulnerability can compromise your intellectual property.
What should an organization do? Where can they get more information now on these best practices to understand more clearly how they can implement them within their organization?
Well, a list of the best practices is posted on the Ponemon Institute's website. It will list the survey, the findings, and the suggestions for best practices when picking a third-party data recovery vendor. As far as additional information, you can go directly to our website. It will show the certifications that we have and the best practices that we have in place. As far as the NIST regulations, you can go to nist.gov and look under the 800.34 guidelines and find the information there for that.
So clearly the message we want everybody to walk away with is vet your third-party data recovery vendors, just like you would all your other vendors through your vendor management program, right?
Absolutely. Because DriveSavers does have these security protocols and practices in place, a lot of companies reach out to us. They know that they have the ability to quickly and easily vet us and have a comfort level with us when they're outsourcing their information to us.
And you tell them what you do and why you do it, and it makes it easier for them on their due diligence.
Absolutely.